There we go. Okay. Trying to get this figured out over here. Okay. Let's see. Sorry about that. All right. Reb Shalom, I see you on. And Baruch Hashem, we're going to start right now. No, that's not the way we want to do it. Hold on one second. There we go. Now we're talking. Okay. Now I can see what's going on, and that's good. We're going to begin for the first time. We're going to begin the teachings of the Arizal, mystical teachings of the Arizal. And this book, The Apples from the Orchard, is an amazing story how it came about. It was because of a desire of people here in Malibu that had wanted to learn more about the mystical teachings of the Torah. And the mystical teachings of the Torah, and the desire turned into a weekly study, which ended up becoming a book several years later. So if you're watching this, I'm going to just tell you that I'm going to do my very best to do it exactly how we did it when we sat together in the early days. Every time a teaching would come out, I'll tell you my own experience is that often, actually more often than not, I really didn't understand what the teachings were telling us. And I understood a little bit here, a little bit there. And even now, many years later, I still struggle with understanding the many of the teachings of the Arizal. But I have learned in the teachings of Kabbalah and Hasidism that because our soul understands this language, it's okay if we don't understand it all, and it's a different type of experience, of course, than when it's one that we understand more. But I'll tell you, at least from my own experience, that often, even though I didn't understand the whole picture, the little bit that I did understand was a big insight to me. So let's dive right in. I want to get the pages on the screen, but I didn't do that beforehand. So what I'll do is I'll just read today, and I'll post in the subject matter a link to where you could read along if you so desire to do so. This pasuk this teaching is based on the teaching of the Holy Arizal, who the Arizal says on the pasuk where it says Vayera Elav Hashem, and Hashem appeared to Avraham the Elone Mamre in the plains of Mamre, who Yoshev Pesach Ha'el Kachem, and Avraham was sitting there at the tent of the gate of his tent in the heat of the day. And there's actually a very important lesson in that, is we learn in the exoteric teachings of Torah that despite the fact that Avraham just had been circumcised just days earlier, despite that he was still there waiting, hoping that he'll have guests, because that was his mitzvah, the big one. Of course, he did all the mitzvahs. So the first four words of the Torah, this is a general rule in Kabbalah, that the consecutive words in the Torah have actually significance to it. And it's often spoken of in the esoteric teachings of the Torah. So the first four words, Vayera Elav Hashem be'elone Mamre, Hashem appeared to him in the plains of Mamre, have the acronym of Yavam, to allude to the fact that Job was a Yavam. Let me tell you what a Yavam is. A Yavam is in the Jewish law, which we don't practice this today. We practice some of it in terms of not doing it, but we don't. It's called a leviriotic marriage. You could look it up. But basically, if a man gets married and he passes away without having any children, there's actually a biblical mitzvah for the next man in line to marry his wife, his widow. And in fact, even further than that, the first child that they have is considered to be associated with the brother who passed on. So it's a certain type of energy in those children who are a product of that kind of marriage. And in fact, Job is a biblical figure who is the one that has the all hell break loose on him, and has horrible stories in his life. He's like when we talk about suffering in the Torah, we often refer to the story of Job, and the letters in the beginning of the Torah portion appear to out in these words, in these letters, to allude to something that the Torah is, it's not even talking about that in any present revealed way, but alluding to in a concealed way. That's the esoteric teachings are. The esoteric teachings are the apples from the orchard. That the letters, as we said before, that consecutive letters, they have a message to them. So now, God had previously told Abraham, but you will come to your fathers in peace. What sort of tiding was this? That means that he's telling him about his passing. So what was he trying to tell him? Obviously, if he was giving him that lesson, then he's imparting to him an idea. What idea was it that he was trying to impart to him? So he's saying, our sages state, God hereby informed him that his father, Abraham, who became the first monotheist in his times, and his father, Terach, who was an idol worshiper, he would actually not pass on before he repented. So the expression actually come to your fathers in peace means that when the individual dies, his soul will repose in paradise with those of his forebears. Since Terach was an idolater, what sort of reassurance was God offering Avraham here? We must therefore conclude that Hashem was telling Avraham that Terach, his father, would actually return and that his soul would rest in paradise. It was good tidings for him because he knew how crooked his father was, and he so hoped for him to have had a turnaround. So the Arizal continues. Let me just show you how it works. Is in the book itself. You look closely. There's the bold and the non-bold. Okay, and the non-bold letters are the commentary. The Hebrew is, of course, the actual words, and the non-bold letter is the commentary. Is a commentary. The bold letters are the actual translation. So I'm just reading through the English. The words "heat in the day" of the day allude to the statement of our sages that on that day Hashem removed the sun from its sheath, this being equivalent of purgatory. Abraham, and all times sought guests to host, like I mentioned earlier. Since this incident occurred shortly after his circumcision, Hashem wished to let Abraham rest, so he made it extra hot so that people would refrain from traveling and no one would be on the road for Abraham to invite to his tent. Now, I just wanted to get present to this idea just before we go further. It's such an amazing thing. You think about the fact that Abraham, as great as he is, he's a human being, and the creator of the world is accommodating his needs in what we just read. Such an incredible lesson for us, actually, to be present to the divine providence that God puts before us when we align ourselves with our better selves. All right, back here. The sun is envisioned as being encompassed by a sheath that protects the world from its rays. One aspect of the purification process of purgatory is unbearable heat. So let's explain. Avram was sitting at the opening of the tent, referring to our sage's statement that he sits at the entrance of purgatory and keeps whoever is circumcised and sealed with the holy covenant and has not blemished it from entering. So Abraham is at the entrance of purgatory, and he saves many from going in there. Abraham was the first Jew to be circumcised, and the covenant of circumcision is known to this day as the covenant of Abraham. Thus, whoever fulfills the commandment of being circumcised and guards the purity of his sexuality merits Avram's protection. Allegorically, this means that guarding sexual purity is sufficient merit to be spared of the ordeal of purgatory, even if one has sinned in other ways that would have required that he undergo the purging process. So you just understand the purging process is important to understand this, because often we talk about purgatory, people think of it as punishment. It's really important to understand that the idea of punishment is so misunderstood, but rather there is a cleansing process when the journey that we are on this earth embraces the materialism to the degree where it has to be washed off of our consciousness. And that is actually painful when it happens in the afterlife, which is why it's amazing when we talk about people getting present to their purpose and turning around and doing teshuvah, that in a split second they can wash themselves off of that. Anyway, let's get back to this. So now, this caused Terach to be reincarnated. When he was returned, he descended as a woman and married according to the Leviriotic law. All right. So if you were not aware of this, now you are. In Judaism, we talk about reincarnation, and in fact, the Arizal is the one who talks a great deal about that. There's an entire book that's just dedicated to that subject matter. So he's saying that Terach, the father of Abraham, had to reincarnate, and he reincarnated as the mother of Job, meaning this woman married and the brother of her deceased childless husband. In such a case, the first child of this union is considered to be the child of the deceased man. Although Terach repented for his sin of idolatry before he died, he evidently had to be reincarnated in order to right his sexual sins. He descended as a woman, presumably to experience female consciousness and realize the seriousness of having used woman. You hear that? So that's something interesting, number one, to think about. Number one, souls of men can go into women and vice versa. And number two, that the reason why that would happen is because we have to experience that we put out there in order for us to be cleansed of it. As a woman, she suffered being childless and losing her husband. She then had to marry the deceased husband's brother. The key to the rectification of Terach's sexual sins was the sexual purity and idealism of his son Abraham. The fact that Abraham reintroduced the idea of sexual integrity into the world allowed Terach's soul to be set straight. So there's a whole journey to it all. And this is what the Torah is alluding to, letting us know about Abraham's desire for his father to have an ascent, a soul's ascent, and for it being pulled off. Job thus lived in the generation of Isaac. He was not comforted by the words of his three friends who came to console him. He was only comforted when he met Isaac, who was called in the book of Job Elihu ben Brachel the Buzite. Isaac, Yitzchak, was called Elihu ben Brachel, literally Elihu, the son of him who God has blessed. For God blessed him. Elihu ben Brachel was from the family of Ram, meaning Avraham. Job, like Isaac, Yitzchak, was a grandson of Terach. He lived in the land of Uz, and Uz was the son of Nachor, Abraham's brother. After God inflicted suffering upon Job, his three friends came to console him, but Job was not consoled by their words, since they each tried to convince him that he had done something to deserve his suffering. Only the younger Elihu, the son of Elihu, which is actually Yitzchak, was able to console Job. Avram's original name was Avram, meaning the father of Ram. This is why Job said, I therefore detest my words and am comforted over dust and ashes, meaning this alludes to Abraham, who said, I am dust and ashes. Job said, in effect, now because of him I'm comforted. Having passed this test, Job completes the rectification of the soul of Terach, and Job went through a lot. He went through a whole bunch just to have that cleansing of Terach, who considered himself as dust as ash. Okay, permits this, and that's why it says this alludes to the fact that Job permits the spell, and he came vayavai. So just giving you different indications where the Torah is hinting to us this truth. Job is also alluded to in the verse describing the reaction of the Jewish people to the splitting of the sea. And the people revered God, and they believed in God and his servant Moses. The initials of the words for God, and they believed in God, spelled Job. Vayaminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe Avdeh. So Hashem, Vayaminu b'Hashem, is also has Job in there. We can now understand why Job's name is alluded to in the description of the splitting of the sea, since Job apparently did not figure at all in this incident. And also, we can now understand why Job delivered him into the hands of Samach Mem. That's the dark angel. We don't even say his name. Samach angel is an angel identified with Satan, the accuser in the heavenly court. The beginning of Job describes how God said to Satan, "Did you notice my servant Job? There's no one like him on earth, a wholesome and upright man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan answered God, "Is it for no reason that Job fears God? Have you not set a protective wall around him, about his household, and about everything he owns from all around? Send forth your hand and touch everything that is his, and see if he does not blaspheme to your face." So Hashem said to Satan, "Everything that is his is hereby in your hand." Oy, did he suffer? The parable our sages used to explain this is as follows. A shepherd was once tending his flock next to a river. A wolf attacked the flock, and the shepherd threw it a lamb to divert its attention from the rest of the flock. Now, in the parable, the wolf would certainly be satisfied with one sheep, for he has no desire to eat the whole flock. But in the analogous case, Samachmem was accusing the entire Jewish people, saying, "These are idol worshippers and those are idol worshippers." How then would he be satisfied just to receive permission to inflict suffering on Job? When the Jews, now this is the commentary on this, necessary. When the Jews were crossing the split sea on their way out of Egypt, they did not reach the other side when the Egyptians entered the sea in pursuit. At that point, we're told the heavenly accuser protested to God, saying, "Both these and those are idol worshippers. Why are you planning to save these and drown those?" And this is, of course, because unfortunately, that's the fact that many of the Jewish people were idol worshippers. I mean, after all, they were completely embedded in the Egyptian society, even though they were slaves. God thereupon threw Satan a bone that is suggested that he inflicts suffering upon Job. This diverted his attention from the Jewish people, who proceeded to cross over the dry land unimpeded, leaving Hashem to overturn the sea to the Egyptians. I just want to tell you, it may sound a little ridiculous. Why does God need anybody's permission? But just understand that God set up a system. That system is the system of cause and effect. He set up that those arguments should be made in the realm of truth. And therefore, he set up also like chutes and ladders, like different ways to get around in order to be able to further his interests, if you will. That's a longer conversation. To understand this, we must explore another matter first. We have seen that at the covenant between the parts, God said to Abraham, "Your seed will be sojourners in the land not theirs. They will serve them and they will oppress them for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation that they will serve. And in the end, they will leave with great wealth. You, however, will come to your forebears in peace. You shall be buried in the good old age. The fourth generation will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite will not be full until then." So now the commentary. In this covenant, God promises Abraham the land of Israel in exchange for his children going into exile. It is called the covenant between the parts. That's in the Torah. Since it was endorsed by Abraham and God, represented by the pillar of fire in this story, passing in between the severed halves of the several animals. The idea was, just as these halves are not complete without each other, so are the two of us not complete without the pact that binds us together. Why, in this passage, does God interrupt the description of what is to befall Abraham's descendants with the statement that Abraham will come to his forebears in peace? How did it belong in there? Why was it important? Furthermore, as we said above, what sort of tiding is it that seeing that Terach was still serving idols, selling them, and through them causing everyone to err? So now we're going to go a little bit into deeper, not that much, but a little bit into deeper, and pay attention, because this is where the magic happens. Okay, so he says, you should know that Chachma, which is the highest of the 10 sephiros that governs the soul, that doesn't govern it but expresses the soul, the highest of which is the Chachma, which is the part within us, the ability within us to be available to that which we don't know and have and gain new insights. That's because we have Chachma. Chachma actually is something that only, the new wisdom that only occurs in the presence of true humility. So Yeshua says the Chachma is what clarifies everything, and the elevation of the sparks of holiness that fell from Tohu depend chiefly upon it. The key to the commentary, the key to differentiating good from evil and knowing how to release the kernel of good within evil in order to liberate it is chachma, often translated as wisdom, but really more accurately as the new insight, the pure insight. The purer one's insight, the clearer one will be able to recognize what is good and what is evil. And purity of insight is dependent upon the purity and the force of one's intentions. By way of analogy, when a blacksmith strikes his hammer on a piece of iron, sparks fly from it. If the blacksmith is an expert, he collects these sparks and returns them to their original state. Apparently, this refers to the slivers of iron that break off the larger piece. The skilled blacksmith knows how to recycle these splinters and use them. This is the essence of the sage's dispute over whether or not a blessing is to be pronounced over an unripe fruit. He who contends that we do not recite a blessing over them thinks that once they have fallen off the tree unripe, and the forces of evil have appropriated them, they are not suitable for a blessing. Commentary. As long as unripe fruit remains on the tree, it can ripen and become edible, potentially. It can be eaten and thereby elevated into the service of Hashem. Assuming the person eating the fruit uses the energy and lift he gets from the eating of for a holy purpose. It makes a blessing. You eat the food and you use it to do something good. So then you elevate the sparks that are generating the life force, and they're referred to as sparks, as Arizal just told us. That it's sparks that come from being connected to source, but because of that which God decided to make the world in the way that he did, they're referred to as fallen sparks. They're right now in an apparent disconnect. And when we reunite them through making a blessing and using the energy of the food, kosher food, to be energized, then we extrapolate those sparks and we are able to elevate those sparks to their source. Once the unripe fruit falls from or is picked, however, it has lost its chance to ever become fit for food. It has thus fallen into the realm of evil and can only become useful again through the roundabout way of decomposing and turning into fertilizer for the next generation of crops. Okay, so that's the argument. It's such an interesting argument that it really think about that. It really changes the argument of the sages about whether you can make a blessing on unripe fruit or not. Now you understand that the reason why is because the whole purpose of that until it's ripe, it doesn't have the forces that we can therefore elevate them. Because you can't make a he's saying because it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So it has to, according to that opinion, therefore it has to be ripe. But the other, let's see what it said over here. Now Rizal doesn't explain. He who contends that we do recite a blessing when we eat them thinks that since they issued from the realm of holiness, they still possess some holiness and may therefore be returned to their source. As it is written, he plans out schemes so that no one will be banished from him. They are therefore suitable for a blessing. Thus, you will, meaning, in other words, since that fruit already was designated to have the possibility of holy sparks, and you don't have to wait till it gets ripe. It's already there. You won't want to eat. You don't want to wait till it gets ripe because it has it in there. But according to the other opinion, it says that until it's developed in an edible way, it doesn't have yet the development to the degree where you can elevate them. Thus, you will understand that when God told Abraham that your seed will be sojourners, and in the end they will leave with great wealth, Abraham asked, how could this be? Inasmuch as Terach, the progenitor of the clan, was so depraved, how could he be rectified and rectify others? God therefore told him, you will come to your forebears in peace, telling you that Terach would actually return. This is also why Hashem told him the fourth generation will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite will not be full until then. That is, Job was amongst them, but was not yet rectified. Afterwards, when he passed this test and was rectified, he was called a finished man, at Ish Tam, a complete man. Although this phrase refers to Job, he was tested. Before he was tested, we are told that after his suffering, Hashem restored to Job all his previous wealth and happiness. Presumably, this means that he did not suffer spiritually either, and remained as finished or complete as he was to begin with. If not, more so. If not, he even got, of course, more purified because of the test that he went through. So perhaps being just by being born, Job signified the completion of the rectification of Terach, who, as we said above, had been reincarnated as Job's mother. But either way, the Ish Tam is referring to, as Arizal says, is that he becomes a complete man, meaning he rectified through the reincarnation that he was of Avraham's father. He rectified that which Avraham's father did wrong. Nevertheless, Job was not Jewish, and the Shells claimed him as their own, and his merit protected them. For all his perfection, Job was not a part of the Abrahamic line. He was a descendant of his brother Nachor, and thus was not a primogenitor of the Jewish people. We are told that when the spies entered the land of Israel, they found the inhabitants mourning over Job's passing, since his merit protected them. So in other words, even at the end, even though it protected the Jewish people, Job protected the Jewish people. He was not Jewish, and if you think about it, it's pretty amazing. He wasn't Jewish, and he suffered in order for the Jewish people to go through he didn't suffer because of it. He suffered because he was a reincarnation of Terach, but it was related to the saving of the Jewish people. But in the completion of his service, where he was successful and he became a complete person, at that time, the ones that were energized and got the blessings for the great stuff that he did was specifically the non-Jewish people. Was specifically the non-Jewish people, because he was not Jewish. It was a blessing for them. Anyway, if you're watching this, if you have any questions and comments, they'll be a little bit more professional looking, with the words